Can you tell me a little bit about your how you got into music?
How I got into music? Oh, goodness gracious. The music in the underground or music as a whole?
Just music in general.
Music as a whole. Always loved listening to music, obviously. But probably started getting serious about wanting to play music when I was a teenager at school. Unfortunately, I always chose the lessons that you couldn't do music up against, so I missed out until I'd actually started my working life. So I started relatively late for a musician. Getting my first bass and my first rig probably when I was about 18.
Yeah, right.
And so from then on, just played ever since. And obviously branched out to all other sorts of things, from singing and playing guitar and the whole deal. So yeah, moving through dancing, naked before the Lord, wasn't it? I think it was.
He was known as Mr. Hooly Dooly.
Hooly Dooly. You're not going to get any sense out of him tonight, you know that, don't you? Yes. Yes. But I've always been involved with Christian bands. So starting out in the 80s, in a band called Archangel, which no one's ever heard of, so don't even try and say that you knew them. And then we moved on to a band called Covenant, where we played around, a lot of gigs around, and then from then on, played in the church quite a lot, and then just been involved with working in the underground. Because we grew up, especially through the 80s and 90s, when we were trying to get gigs, it was basically impossible. So I guess part of the vision of the thing was like make a place where people can actually, have somewhere to play and foster a new band, have a good environment as well. So we never really had that opportunity. So that was probably one of the things that pushed us and motivated us, I think, was to have a safe place and to foster bands.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Andrew, how did you get into music?
Well, I ended up being the pastor of Heavy Metal Church.
Where was that?
That was right here.
All right.
So we started off in a basement just off Rundle Street, and so we got nicknamed the Underground, and because we're geographically, physically, we're underground. And then when we got this location a year and a half later, we thought we'd incorporate the nickname into the name of the church, and so we just kept it the Underground City Outreach. So now it's just known as the Underground.
So when did that start?
The gigs?
When did the first gig start in the underground basement?
Oh, well...
there were plenty of gigs there, but they weren't official underground gigs.
We had gigs, but that's because guys in the church were in bands. Either they were in bands or they would be out watching bands. So everybody was connected to the alternative music scene.
It was a culture of the church.
Yeah.
Everybody in the church was in some way related to the scene. So you were either in a band or you knew someone that was in a band, and the whole culture kind of revolved around that. It was a very musical culture. So, whereas other people might have a party and put on a stereo, we'd have a party in someone's house and play in the kitchen, and there were plenty of times where we'd have our bands in the kitchen, crammed in the corner, and everyone else would be having a good old dance or a mosh in the kitchen. So whenever we had, New Year's Eve at church or something like that, there'd be a couple of bands playing, because there was at least 2 or 3 bands in the church at the time.
So that wasn't quite the gig scene, but we certainly had gigs, and that was just the culture and the lifestyle. So anyway,
when was that? What was the date?
The date for
early 90s.
Early 90s?
Early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think. Yeah, you were involved in the early 90s. I started pastoring this church in '94. So they were already involved in the music scene. Then I came on the scene as their pastor in '94, and the scene it just grew stronger.
So the basement was in early 90s, and then when did you move to this place?
We moved here about 96, and I think it was about half a year later that Michael Wright came to me and said he had to do a youth project, and
Bible college.
Yeah, for Bible college, and I said, well, rather than doing a youth project for another church, or because it's part of Bible college, they'd farm me out somewhere, why don't you do something for us?
Yeah.
And I said to him, years ago when I was a chaplain in high school, I wanted to put on a dance night for the kids, something that's safe that they can go to, so why don't you look into establishing something like that? So he went away and prayed about it, and he came back to me several days later and he said, okay, I'll do it, but I want to do it with bands. So I said, okay. So he went away and started organising it and worked out what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. And I suggested to him that find a name for it that is so it's standalone, something different from the underground city outreach. But he came back and said, no, I really feel God wants to call it the underground. And I thought, you got the underground church and you got the underground gig. I thought, but so, okay, that's what you felt, so we did that. So he started with the first gig, and I think we used our very basic church sound system. We had no stage. We had these dodgy fairy lights around a Jesus Reign sign.
3 or 4 porta floods on some carpet. And
Yeah.
that was our first gig.
That was our first gig, and we started them off every 3 months, and then as they grew in popularity, we went to 2 months, then eventually every month, and then it became consistent last Friday of every month.
Cool. And just name some of we'll just perhaps mention some of the people that were involved in the team. Like, so some of the other people. So you mentioned Michael.
Yep, Michael, myself.
Yeah.
In fact, he asked me to be the bouncer on the first night.
Yeah.
Me, what a big bunny rabbit. Why would you do that?
He's a
The
scary
jolliest,
Anyway,
the jolliest guy in the church
jolliest
is
guy
going to be the
wants me to be the
bouncer.
bouncer. So
Yeah.
I just stood there trying
How'd
to
you
look
go?
me. People push me around a lot.
Yeah.
That's good.
He bounced.
Yeah, I did bounce very well.
Did you have to kick anyone out?
Nah, look,
Never
to be
had
honest, over the whole history of the underground, when I've been like really closely involved, there's never been fights or anything like that. It's actually been a really good scene. When you compare it to, say, a pub scene or whatever, wow, what a difference, one, the spiritual climate, and two, the lack of alcohol makes.
Yeah.
People don't, go around causing fights. They actually just are there to have fun, and it's a healthy atmosphere.
Yeah,
It's
the
good.
atmosphere was, I think it was like a very enjoyable atmosphere where people, can't wait to come to the underground, and it was like safe, and that's the whole point. People came to
Relaxed and friendly.
Relaxed and
Yes.
friendly, yes.
Yeah. That's it. It's a good place for bands to start out.
And there was no sleaze, and that was really important. A lot of people said that,
Yeah.
that there was no sleaze in the place. So it's just purely Christians coming, having a good time, and just watching Christian bands, and that's what really made it as well. And obviously God behind the whole thing. I think the reason why it was successful and still is God was behind it. It wasn't like a business venture or just a good idea. It's a God idea, really. God birthed through the underground church.
And like other people involved.
Other people involved. Who else was there?
There's a girl called Monique.
Monique, Irene,
Andrea.
Andrea was there. Who else have we got?
Christian for a little while.
Christian, yeah. Hey, Christian.
Christian Sullivan.
Yeah, Christian. He was a classic. There was a lot of people that would come and help from night to night, but there was also a core group of people. Of probably about
Part of the underground church.
part of the underground. Probably 7 or 8 people, I'd say, would have been the core that really were there every week. Every time there was a gig, they were there. No questions asked, no expectation of being paid, no anything. You did it because you believed in the vision and you believed it was doing something good. You wanted to do a community service, and you wanted to be there, to outreach to people. And as soon as you hear of the first person that their friend became a Christian because they came to these gigs and they realised that all Christians were talking and blah blah blah, it's just like, wow, man, that was all worth it, wasn't it?
Yes.
And so that's the way it goes. You just think, well, it's just like playing in the pubs. When we used to play in the pubs, as long as one person, gets saved out of it, then it's all worth it. So, and then you just get more encouraged and become more fanatical, and we
That's
just
it.
kept going and going and going and loving it. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. So the energy just picked up.
Yeah, it was good. It was self-perpetuating.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard because you're just doing it all the time, but the love of it, I think, is really good. So
Put your seats way into
yeah,
it.
it's almost like going to a birthday party every week,
Yeah.
because it was just like you just loved it, and
It had that kind of fun
yeah,
atmosphere.
it was. It was like a birthday party every week. It was good.
Alrighty. And now if we start going through the evolution of the Lunar, sort of like start mentioning the first bands, I guess, like, and how it progressed, as you sort of said.
First bands.
What were the
Ethereal
what were the
Scourge.
first bands on the scene?
Yeah, Ethereal Scourge,
Embodiment.
Embodiment. Yeah, a few guys from, because obviously guys like Embodiment and Ethereal Scourge, and in the really early days, people like Discarnated used to tour a lot. We used to know a lot of people in the interstate, so we could get people to come in. So bands like Callous, Mortification came over, Paramecium. Did they play here as well? I can't remember now.
I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
It's a long time ago. It's all a blur. I'm pretty sure they did as well. So I do remember them playing here a few times. So it's all a blur.
And what was the predominant style early?
I think earlier on,
Heavy, isn't
it was very heavy. It was very. It was probably on the tail end of the death metal scene, and so yeah, bands like Ethereal Scourge, Embodiment were very much into death metal in their inception many years ago. A lot of people don't realise how old the band really is.
Yeah.
But it was also on the opening of, you know, on this cusp of going over to punk and hardcore, and you know, Embodiment were well on the way to doing that at that stage. And I just think kids coming along, seeing the bands, obviously they get inspired and they want to do the same styles. And I think the styles, they weren't really following the trends of the world. They were pretty much.
It's picking up all right.
It's going great, mate. Thank you. I don't think they were more trendsetters than following the trends, wouldn't you say? Like,
Yeah.
you know, we weren't
Yeah,
copying what was around. A lot of people were very original and quite inspired.
Yeah.
I think.
I think when the punk scene came, because the hardcore, I mean, basically Embodiment brought the hardcore scene.
Yeah,
And they
absolutely.
were really I'd say they were really the only Christian band doing it, because you had Ethereal Scourge and that sort of, you know, finished with what they had to do, and then you got into the punk scene and pop rock. But the punk scene came up and just flourished. It just kept on going, and it's still going
Cirrus
today.
Cole
Yeah,
was at the forefront of
Cirrus
it.
Cole, STR, Hucklenut, all those bands. It just grew out of that and just flourished and flourished out
Jemima.
of itself.
Jemima, classic little band.
Yeah,
Very
a little bit
solid.
of grunge like Jeremiah's Cry came through. Even I don't know, what would you call My Arctic Surrender back then?
Pop rock.
Pop rock still.
Metal.
Pop rock
Yeah,
metal.
Pop rock metal.
Grunge.
All
So
of the above.
I think that they were feeding on themselves, particularly the punk music. They were really feeding on themselves and getting excited about it. And I think that's what really kept it going in the whole scene, is that whole thing. They were feeding on each other, you know, forming new bands.
Different ways of music coming in. So the punk scene really took off, and everything was punk, and then all these varieties came together, and then the what's the scene with the brass in it?
Oh yeah.
Forgotten the name. of it
Goodness
now.
gracious.
You guys should know.
Well, there was,
Yeah.
these pretzels are making me thirsty.
Yeah, that's right.
The ska band.
Ska bands. Yeah,
Ska.
it's quite a bit of stuff.
Yeah, the new style
7/10
ska,
splits.
and that had a little bit of a heyday, but
Yeah,
then it went back to
70s.
punk, and then the hardcore scene came back. So it's kind of revolving round.
Emo rock and roll.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that came through as well. That evolved through as well. Yeah, just different styles of punks started to evolve, and I think a lot of the bands were also experimenting as well.
Yeah. They're really
was it-
mixing it up.
Yeah,
Mixing the
like
styles
you had
up.
bands like Hone that formed, which was
They were
quite
great.
very, very different to the rest, which was good. It just
What about
added
Leslie
colour.
Does? They were pretty good, weren't they?
Oh, they were great.
They were excellent band, weren't they? They were
fantastic.
great.
Yeah, oh, they're the best.
What happened to them?
I think they faded into obscurity somewhere.
Yeah, so you had bands like Hone particularly that I think were really experimental, and obviously
Yeah, they were.
from there, you know, Edison formed, and
Yeah.
just a mix of bands, but punk was really predominant.
Well, that's why the underground was so good, because it gave people a place to express and feel free to express whatever they wanted. And so they wouldn't feel afraid to try to, you know, hey, let's just try something totally different. And people weren't afraid to do it there. So it was
Bonnie
a good-
Doon.
Bonnie Doon.
Bonnie Doon with
Yeah.
James Hickey. They had a bit of the bones in there.
Indeed.
I believe, yeah. So yeah, a mixture of stuff that actually came through it.
Obviously. And but like, 'cause it was